The Asphalt Art program is administered by FC Moves, the Transportation Planning Department of the City of Fort Collins. The Paint Pot program is a grant-funded asphalt art project made possible through a grant from the National Association of City Transportation Officials. With special thanks to Bike Fort Collins and Jillian Betterly for programmatic support. This storytelling project is a collection of voices from the neighborhoods where the asphalt murals were painted. Several of the voices are Indigenous, Hispanic, and Latino community members with long generational ties to the neighborhoods called Tres Colonias, or the Spanish colonies. This episode features Ashley Cordova from Alta Vista.
My name is Ashley Marie Cordova, and I was born June 12, 1987, here in Fort Collins, Colorado, at Poudre Valley Hospital. I'm from Fort Collins. I'm a Fort Collins native, born and raised. So I am very proud of my roots and where I come from. So I do say, I am Spanish, I'm Native American, and my father was German. So I embrace my heritage. We go back all the way from Spain, I think, in the early 1600s and 1700s. 1800s New Mexico, and then we settled from the southern New Mexico into Fort Collins in the early 1900s. My great-grandfather, Jose Dolores Cordova, he came out to Fort Collins and other surrounding areas to work the sugar beet factory, the fields, and he had a family in New Mexico, and he would come and go, and finally he brought the family out here to Fort Collins in 1921. He brought my grandmother, Rosie Cordova, and just listening to that story and being told that story for 35 years it's really just mind-blowing. To 100 years ago, my grandmother came here in a covered wagon at 6 months old. I've always embraced, we've always, embraced, we're an all-American family. Growing up in the Spanish colony, which is Alta Vista, we had a tough time there. I mean, it was a lot of Spanish families, a lot of Mexican families were there. And we would always correct them because people would say, oh, you're a dirty Mexican, or so we'd have to correct people like we're American, we came from Spain, but we've been in America for 200-300 years. So that was really hard, and even to this day, I get, people will ask me, even working, so my background is performing arts, and when I did that for many years, I would get asked, a lot of directors would ask me, what is your ethnicity? Like, you can play an Italian or Native American, and I'd get really offended because I'm like, I'm an American. And so, that did really play a big part in our family. I am very proud of my roots and where I come from. I do say, I am Spanish, I'm Native American, and my father was German, so I embrace my heritage. When I was growing up, my whole entire childhood, I lived in the Spanish colony, and I went to school with peers of mine who were wealthier, who lived in a really nice area in Fort Collins, and I was always ashamed and embarrassed to tell them where I came from and who I was. So in my 20s, as I got older and I started having children and being involved with theater, that really just opened up doors for me. And I started talking about it more and identifying myself and who I was. Just where I grew up, I mean, people they would relate because we were all really the same. We were Spanish but going to school, that was tough because I hung around with my peers were Caucasian and, coming from white families, and they didn't understand. I was brought up in a different my grandparents raised me, and they were both born in the 1920s. So I learned how to wash my clothes on the washboard, and my peers didn't understand that because they had a washer and dryer. So my grandmother taught me how to wash my clothes on a washboard and hang up my clothes on a clothesline. And we had to chop up wood to feed our wood coal burning stove. And my friends just didn't understand that and who I was. And it was very hard for me. But later on in life, where I am now, I appreciate all of that so much. I was raised by Rosie and Phil Cordova. It's funny because my grandparents had the same last name, but there was no relation. So my grandmother came from Seto, New Mexico in the 1920s, and my grandfather, Philip Cordova, he and his family were already here and established residency out here in Fort Collins. So when they merged their families together, the Cordova family just grew and is still growing. They were amazing people. They raised a family. They had 11 kids, 9 boys and 2 girls. So my mother was one of the girls. My grandfather always worked until he had a accident. He was working and his leg was actually amputated because he was working in the tunnels and there was an accident, but very hardworking people. My grandmother went to school until she was in 5th grade and she dropped out because she was the oldest out of her family to help her parents raise her siblings, my grandmother's siblings. So she dropped out of school. She worked the sugar beet, the fields, potato fields. Just a very strong, independent woman. Education was really important to my grandmother, and a majority of her children graduated high school, furthered their education into college. Even her grandkids, it was always an expectation, like do good in school. So I actually got married, had my children. I dropped out of school, and I knew how important it was to her. So I went back and furthered my education, and I completed all of that. And that was after she had passed away, but I knew how important that was. And I have another cousin who was a troubled teen, and he actually completed high school and is back in college now because, 20 years ago, my grandma has been gone. It'll be 16 years this year, but it was so embedded in our blood. What she used to tell us all the time is further your education. So we listened. She wanted us to be able to not have an easier life than she did, but she didn't want us to work as hard as she did. Dropping out in 5th grade, taking care of her siblings, her family, working in the Great Western Sugar Beet Company. It was really hard. She worked in the fields pregnant. She stayed in the same house that her father built in 1921, 22. She grew up there. She lived there. She, raised a family there, and she died there. It was very important to us to keep our legacy because of her and others. Our ancestors and our great aunts and uncles and our great grandparents, her parents. So her father, my grandfather, Jose Dolores Cordova, is the one who built our family home located, which still stands at 749 Martinez Street. It's one of the oldest adobe homes in Fort Collins. And when they came out from New Mexico, when they came out to Colorado, population back then, I remember my grandma saying it was no more than 1,000 people. So as you can imagine, here we are 100 years later, and we're just growing. It's kind of bittersweet for me because I grew up here, and just seeing all the the new development, the new structure, it's kind of hard for me. Like, I still go by the colony and I do a lot of work there. And we have family events and stuff. It's just so different to me because there's still a couple of families that I grew up with that are still there. A majority of them have either passed away, sold their home, or that's really it, is those two. They've passed away or sold their home, and all these other families are moving in. And like I say, they really don't know much about the colony, and they're like, what is the colony? And then I get into this whole, well, before Alta Vista, it was the Spanish colony, and this is why we were our own little colony. We were actually called, people used to call the colony no man's land, or Buckingham was the jungle. There was different names for the neighborhoods, but we were no man's land because nobody wanted anything to do with the Spanish colony. No one. And then when the city came in, that's when they gave it the name Alta Vista. Now it's 2-story buildings going up, blocking our view. And Alta Vista means, high view. And it's like, how do we protect that view that we worked so hard for? The families, the homeowners that reside there, it's definitely not the Spanish colony anymore. And that's totally fine. People, it's considered a part of Old Town, and people want to be close to the breweries, and that's just devastating. And it breaks my heart too, is, with the 3 colonies that were there, and, the Spanish colony, I know the 3 colonies, but we were our own entity. We didn't go out. We weren't really involved with Andersonville and Buckingham. We were our own. They were their own as well. So we were always told, we're like, don't go past the train tracks to the south side or the east side. You guys, it was our turf. It was our territory. And we didn't, we obeyed that. We didn't go. But those 3 neighborhoods, families knew other families. We got along with other families. We went to church together, but we were our own entity. My mother's house actually just sold for $400,000, and it's a modular home in that neighborhood. And back then, in 1922-23, when my grandfather started building in Alta Vista, we had like 5 lots. We still have 1, 2. We have three of those lots. Those lots were $25 a piece. And so I have the documentation on all of that. I in a way, in a sense, it is good because my kids get to see what Fort Collins is now. But for me, it was like, there was a sense of freedom, and we got to run in the fields and play, and my kids will never get to experience like what riding a bike is like, or playing in the mud and sand and building a clubhouse out of a tree. It was fun. We were wild. We were free. We had a tree house that was called the Barney Tree, and we used to have like little meetups there. And one of my really good friends had this huge playhouse in her neighbor's backyard that we used to go play in. My role is to tell my story so future generations will know where we came from and who we are, because 100 years, we have 8 generations of Cordovas in Fort Collins, and that's just so significant. And so I love talking about it. Like even when I go to church or I go to other events and we start talking about like, what is Fort Collins to you? What does it mean to you? And I just hear all these stories. People are moving from California here, and I'm just like, and then I tell my story and they're just like, oh my gosh, we had no idea. So we were one of the earliest Hispanic families to arrive here. And I believe we kind of made a big impact in this town. And I don't want to ever forget that. that is just really important to me. My great-grandfather was recruited to work in the Great Western Sugar Beet Company from New Mexico. How poor we really were. I heard stories about my great-grandfather who he used to have credits at some of the local little stores in town. He would never use it, but if, he needed like Volcanico or something for his knees and stuff for working in the fields, just bending over all the time. God, they were just a strong people. My great-grandfather, I never got to meet Jose Dolores Cordova, but I've heard stories about just what an amazing man he was, a family man, a good husband, a good father, and even, where he planted his seed. And then my grandmother came along, and she and her husband, my grandfather Philip, had 11 children. That's a big family. And just planting all those seeds here and just keep, we just keep growing. So my mother lived 2 doors down from my grandparents. My mother was a single mom raising 3 daughters. And I was born in 1987 and my grandfather died in 1995 from cancer. And at that time I probably had 50 first cousins. So my grandparents probably had between 40 and 60 grandkids. And I always used to, and people still tell me, like, you were grandpa's favorite. I was my grandfather's favorite granddaughter and grandchild. And we were 2 peas in a pod. We did everything together. And he was just so amazing. My grandparents were just amazing people. My grandmother, we used to pick choke cherries together and make choke cherry jelly. And she used to have me watch her cook all the time. I hate cooking now because it was forced. Growing up, it was forced. And I'm just like, I don't like it. But she taught me so much. From a very young age, I was sitting on the table while she was flipping tortillas, and she used to make stacks of tortillas, and she was known for her famous beans. I don't know how she made beans, there's nothing to making beans, but my beans never turn out. I'm like, what is the secret to these beans? And even in her obituary, and when we had her funeral, that was brought up as the stacks of tortillas and the beans, the homemade food. Every morning she would wake up and have burritos rolled up for all of my uncles going to work. She would have breakfast for me while I was getting ready to get on the school bus. Just very, even up until like the weeks before she passed away, she was in her kitchen cooking. She would cook for an army and she'd feed everybody. She would not let anything go to waste. Nothing. She would not let anything go to waste. She would feed, we had deer in the yard, so they'd come and eat our crab apples and wildlife and stuff. The bird, she'd feed the bird, she'd feed stray cats, and she was just a beautiful, selfless soul. Just so pure and very strong and so religious, and her faith just kept her going. My grandma had a remedy for everything, and I think I carry that because I'm so holistic where I won't even take a Tylenol, but my grandma had a remedy for everything. We'd get stung by a bee and she would go get mud and an aspirin and put it on our bee sting, and we would heal. Or she'd have a little piece of Native American OSHA if we were sick or we had surgery or a tooth or just anything, like putting just weird stuff like potatoes in a sock. Or she used to have like this beautiful flawless skin, never wore makeup. She used to wear rouge when going to church. She used to put rouge on, but My mom would always tell the story, like she'd always catch my grandma. We never knew why her skin was so like soft and nice, but my mom's like, I caught her with orange pills, rubbing her face with the orange pills or the lemon pills. Still to this day, everything I do, I always think about my grandparents. Would they approve? Would they not approve? I would love to be like them. I think I can always improve, but they did both teach me loving, caring, be compassionate, be a good human, be a good American. So in the Spanish colony, it was called that because back then there were only Spanish families that lived there. And the city didn't claim us until like I want to say they came out maybe in the 84. We still had an outhouse at my grandparents' house in 1984. So that wasn't too long ago. That was like 37 years ago that we still had an outhouse. My grandmother didn't have the electricity until later on. They grew all of their vegetables. We had livestock. I had livestock. I used to raise my billy goats. I used to put a nipple on a beer bottle and feed my goats. And it was very devastating when the city came in and was like, oh, you have to get rid of your livestock. It was just so devastating to me. But it was a very unique time, for sure. It was a very unique time. 1990, it had to have been like 1994, 1995. We couldn't have livestock. We couldn't have poultry anymore, which was just, it was so devastating to me because my grandparents actually raised their livestock and ate their livestock. We were just doing it to raise animals. We weren't eating our livestock. So the city came in and made those rules. Okay, this is a city, regulation. You can't have livestock or poultry. So we got rid of it. I think we've done really well for ourselves. I think we've come a long way from nothing to we're furthering our education. We're serving the community. We've established so much out here. So in 2017, I got involved with the city of Fort Collins, and I got a bunch of materials together and I presented this, and I was like, we have been here for a very long time, and we were granted a street named after us in 2017, which is Cordova Road. And I worked really hard, endless hours, and we were up against so many people, deserving people, the Gallegoses, the Godineses, the Gavaldons, and we proved ourselves. Actually, like the first month, we had to start the whole entire thing over because somewhere along the lines, people were like, there's no way there's so many votes that are coming in for just one name. And so I started the process all over again, and we still came out. Wade Troxel at the time, he was our mayor, and he was like, I've never seen anybody with so many votes, and this is so amazing. So that just spoke really highly to me, as well as I remember that being in the city council meetings and the town hall meeting, and they announced that we were granted that name. That just, it just felt really, really good because my family has, like I said, they've worked so hard here, and our men and women sacrificed their lives and left their families for weeks, months, years on end, and came home, and they protect and served, and they did what they had to do. I have family who were educators with Poudre School District for many years, and my cousin Kenny Cordova and the old rock band who performed for over 30 years in Fort Collins and our community. And I have my godbrother's a history teacher at Fort Collins High School, so just my grandmother's impact in her life has really stuck with family. I hope and pray Fort Collins keeps the rich history, the uniqueness of this little town. I know that it will continue to grow. I'm sure this is all going to merge with, we're going to at some point be, Denver's moving further north. So this will probably all be like the Front Range. We are going to continue to grow, and I have to accept that. But I hope and wish and pray that we keep, the rich history alive and what made Fort Collins what it is. I think we're just kind of all passing through this life, but hoping, I've gotten so much, just how I was raised and what I use to this day and how I raised my children. Those were life lessons that were just, I am so grateful and thankful for. It's taught me a lot about sacrifice because my family sacrificed. My great-grandfather would have to leave his family and come and work, and how my grandma was just so selfless and had to quit school at such a young age to help her siblings, and then her raising her family and just being strong. It has just taught me so much patience and value. I think technology would be much different, but just Google Cordova, Fort Collins. We are a family who came out here and we wanted an all-American, we wanted to live the American dream. And a lot of us, we've gotten to a good point, a good place, and I want to pave that for my future generations, for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. And I want them to be proud